وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Welcome back to another session of A Beautiful Heart. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to beautify our hearts, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Today our attribute is Husnul Ishra, that is good companionship. And this is a broader perspective from a previous characteristic we went over, which was al-ulfa wa tawaddud, which was endearing and affection. And husnul ishra goes back to the concept of the ishra. And the word ishra means when things are enjoined together, they come together and they mix. And so a person's ashira, their tribe, is called that because they are a group of people who are constantly mixing together. And so Ishra, this Husn al-Ishra, is having good companionship in a sense that when someone is mixing with you, meaning socially or professionally, however it may be, that we do it with ihsan, we do it with excellence and with good, with element of good, and in order to beautify bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And so there's a lot to say about Husnul Ishra, and Quran, Hadith talk immensely about it. And it is mentioned in various ways. And so to try and organize this to the best of my ability, I'd like to first and foremost observe who has most right when it comes to our good companionship. Well, the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that the person who has most right to your good companionship is your mother, and then your mother, and then your mother, and then your father. And so the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us that, if there's anyone who is deserving of us being good to them, and when we mix with them, we are around them, that we are good with them, then it is our parents. Now, there's some debate as to whether the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning this as a way to get the Arabs out of a mindset where the women are really secondary, they're marginal, and my mother is just my mother, who cares, my father is more important, or whether it's really in a particular order, the mother has number one precedence. But either way, the idea is that if we want to have this beautiful characteristic of good companionship, then we should start with our parents. And unfortunately, in our context in the West, the way people are, especially with American-born children, this is always a struggle and a challenge. The relationship between parents and children is not healthy, generally speaking. It's not healthy. And so we really need to get out of that mindset. Whether your parents were good to you or not, whether they were the loving parents you wish they were, whether they were able to provide you the things that you wanted, they still are deserving of good companionship. Because the only reason any of us are here, the only reason any of us are able to watch this video, this presentation, is because our parents took care of us during a time for several years where we were simply incapable, unable to take care of ourselves. The fact of the matter is, when we were infants, we could not feed ourselves, we could not clean ourselves, we could not take care of ourselves, we couldn't even protect ourselves. It was our parents who were doing that, assuming they were alive. And if our parents weren't with us, then whoever our guardian was. And there's a lot of burden that comes with that, as any parent knows. And so the reason why they are deserving of good companionship is because they have already done so much for us. And so it's time to repay that. And good companionship, what that entails, we will see in a moment exactly what the Prophet ﷺ advised us. But also among those who are deserving of our companionship is our spouse, our wives. And the Prophet ﷺ kept telling us, O men specifically, استوصوا بالنساء خيرا. I command you, I command you to be good to your wives. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, telling the men, وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Live with them, mix with them in that which is good, in that which is fair. If you don't like your spouse, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Perhaps you don't like your wife, but at the same time, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make in your wife, will put in your wife, who you don't like too much, a lot of good for you. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that, look, if you cannot deal with your wife, if you cannot be good to her, then leave her. Let her live her life. If you cannot live with her in marriage, then divorce her, give her her fair share when it comes to the mahir, give her what you owe her, and let her live her life. Let her go back to her family. Let her be independent of you. Don't make her life miserable because you simply don't like the way things are. Let her go, and that is part of husn al-ishra. And if you want to go a step beyond, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِلْمُطَلَّقَاتِ مَتَاعٌ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ حَقًّا عَلَى الْمُتَّقِينَ. And if you divorce your wife, then give them a gift. Give them a monetary gift so that they can go see their lives. But whatever you do, do not hold them. Do not keep them in this marriage. And at the same time, simultaneously, you are harming them. You are putting them down. You are making their life miserable for them. Marriage is supposed to be simpler than the way we see it today, where if a divorce happens, I mean, everyone's life is ruined. Make it simple. But inshallah, that doesn't have to happen. If the men are good with their wives, they have husn al-ishra, this beautiful characteristic of good companionship with their lives. And who better to look at than the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam? The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, I mean, we all have heard of how he engaged his wives, how he loved his wives, how he played with his wives, how he made them laugh, made them smile, how he catered to their needs. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that they would race. A very common story we all know, but it is good to remind ourselves that they would race. And when Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha was younger, right, she was in the early part of the marriage, she would outpace the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. But later on in life, when they grew a little bit older, and Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that, I put on a little bit of weight, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam would beat me in racing. And racing, something, whatever, it sounds very mundane, so it sounds very lame, or not too interesting. But the idea here is that the Prophet ﷺ engaged Aisha in an activity that brought them together. It's not about the racing. It's not the racing per se that we're looking at, that we are trying to use as a means towards good companionship, but rather it is the interaction between them, that they raced with one another. Also, the Prophet ﷺ is described as, is known for his love for Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that, I was never jealous of the Prophet ﷺ's other wives, because she knew that the Prophet loved her more than the rest. But she always tried to compete with Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, even though Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha passed away before Aisha ever married the Prophet ﷺ. Why is that? I mean, she didn't see Khadija as a co-wife. She didn't see Khadija, and kind of compete with her when Khadija was alive. Khadija passed away. So why did Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha feel this type of competition towards Khadija, this jealousy towards her? Because the Prophet ﷺ would always talk about Khadija and his love for her, and how good she was to him, and what she did for him. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, who believed in the Prophet ﷺ before anyone else believed, who gave him comfort, emotional comfort, physical comfort. She helped him with the financial situation and so many other things. He loved her so much, and his good companionship towards her was to the extent that even a decade after her death, the Prophet ﷺ would send gifts to Khadija's friends. Imagine that. This is good companionship. That we recognize, for the men, we recognize what our wives love, and we provide them with that. We know our wives as close friends, and we honor them in honor of our wife. And customs, traditions change from time to time. Maybe it's not appropriate for a man to send another lady a gift in our times, but at least if you see that your wife is really close to some ladies, and those ladies are respectable ladies, they're not vicious or problem causers, you see that, then make sure that you allow her a place at home, you encourage her to invite her friends when they go out, to let her go out with them. That is part of husn al-ishra, being good. And the Prophet ﷺ also spoke about how a wife can be good to her husband. What is good companionship? And the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that a good wife is a wife who, when her husband sees her, it brings him joy. It brings a smile to his face. And that's not as hard and as difficult as it might seem. Yes, some men are grumpy. Some men are just naturally like that. You can't really please them. You can't bring a smile to their face. But for everyone else, we can. Think, oh ladies, and you know better. I don't need to sit here telling you how to do that. But the idea is that part of being a good companion to your husband is by doing things, looking a certain way, behaving a certain way that brings a smile to your husband's face, that makes him feel joy. Also, a good wife is someone who, if her husband requests something from her, and of course it's reasonable and he does it in a respectable manner, then you go ahead and do that for him. Men love it when the wife listens. We love it. Call it ego, but nonetheless, it's part of good companionship. And what I see is that when a wife is constantly kind of always disobeying, I don't like using that word. She simply care less about what her husband thinks or what her husband says. And anytime she sees her husband want something, she does the opposite. That's going to destroy the marriage. That is bad companionship. That's not what Islam teaches us. Also, the Prophet ﷺ, addressing women, says that a woman who is good in her companionship to the Prophet ﷺ is someone who does not hang out with and does not allow in her home someone that her husband does not like. Right? Someone who her husband does not like. And so good companionship really needs a lot of focus when it comes to our spouses. And if we remember in the first session, we spoke about ihsan, excellence. And we spoke about the meaning of hasan. And a part of the meaning is to make something more beautiful, to beautify something. And so we need to appreciate this word involved when we say good companionship. That when we have good companionship, when we behave in a good manner with our spouse, with our parents, then what it does is it beautifies the relationship. It makes it more beautiful. And if the closest people to you, your relationships to them is beautiful, then will that not beautify your own life? Is it not in our best interest to be good to our close family members, to our spouses, to our parents, to our siblings, to our children? Of course it is. We will benefit from that just as much, if not more, than those who we are being good to. Likewise, we get the reward. Allah loves such behavior. It is imitating, it's emulating the Prophet ﷺ, and there's so much reward in that. So not only are we beautifying our lives, we are also beautifying our afterlife. Subhanallah. May Allah make us among those of beautiful character. May Allah make us among those who have good companionship. Also, good companionship beyond the family, with our friends, with our employees, those who we see constantly. There is much to say there as well. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us that when we deal with our servant, al-khadim, Now, in America, it's not common to have a servant, but perhaps we hire someone to help us, a maid, help us with whatever it is. We have a gardener. We have someone who does our lawn for those who live in areas with bigger land and landscaping and whatnot. We have employees. Well, there's good treatment to them as well. And the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that if you have a servant, that if you have food, to make sure that you give them food as well. Give them the same food that you are eating. If you have clothing, if you're clothed, then make sure you give clothing to your servant that is similar to you. And the companions took this to heart, by the way. I mean, some of the companions took this so literally that their servants would be walking around with them and they're wearing literally the same exact clothes. Why? Well, because the Prophet ﷺ told us this is part of good companionship. This is part of what it means to be a Muslim. For the employers out there, to treat your employees good, do not overwork them. And if they do extra work, to make sure you compensate them fairly, to make sure that your role in their lives, I mean, you see each other for several hours a week, 40 hours a week. It's a type of family it becomes. You kind of stuck with each other. Yes, you can fire, yes, you can rehire, whatever it is, but in the end, an employer doesn't want to sit there firing and hiring people. It's not going to do well for the business. So be good to your employees. Right? Every now and then, give them a gift, give them a bonus, give them incentive, have a joke with them, have some, personal time with them. It's not only business and professional, of course, within the realms of what is respectable. That is also part of good companionship. The scholars teach us. I believe it's Abu Huraira who says this, if I'm not mistaken. Abu Huraira says that when someone sits with me, jalisati, so when you're sitting down and someone comes in and they join your gathering, or if maybe you're at a masjid and you're sitting together and someone comes and joins you, or you're having a breakfast at the masjid and someone comes and sits with you, Abu Huraira radiallahu ta'ala anhu teaches us that when someone comes and sits with me, I see that they have 3 rights over me. When they first come in, I acknowledge their presence. I see them. I say assalamu alaikum, for example. I look at them and I welcome them and say, hey, tafaddal, please sit down. A lot of times what happens in the masajid, especially when it's, of different cultures, the Arabs are sitting and the Desis are sitting, when I understand the cultural and that we like to be with people from our own culture, the joking, speaking our native languages. Okay? But if you see someone, come down, come by you, invite them, welcome them, acknowledge that they're there. Don't just continue your conversation with someone else and completely ignore them. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us that if there are 3 people, then he prohibited 2 people from talking to each other in a kind of secretive way because it makes the third one sad. And in our times today, what happens all too often, and I'm guilty of this, there are 3 people. 2 of them speak the same language and the third one doesn't. And the 2 begin to speak with each other in the native language. And the third one is just kind of sitting there as feeling like a third wheel, that he doesn't or she doesn't belong. I know we fall into this mistake, and mistake is a mistake, but let's try and improve to beautify our behavior. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu is telling us that when someone would come, he would acknowledge their presence, he would look at them, he would welcome them, he would give them salam. Also, number 2, if he wants to sit down, Abu Hurairah will make room for him. Sometimes we have a table. This happens, for example, at OCIF. There's a table, and it can only fit so many people. Someone comes, and they don't see a spot. Part of good companionship is to encourage everyone else to make room for our friend, for our fellow Muslim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمْ تَفَسَّحُوا فِي الْمَجَالِسِ فَافْسَحُوا يَفْسَحِ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. O you who believe, if it is said to you to make room in your gathering, then make room, Allah will make room for you. So there's barakah in that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising you that if you make room for someone, make space for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to increase for you what you have and what makes you happy, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So if someone would come, Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala an says that it is a right upon me, it is a responsibility of mine to make room for this individual. And number three, and this one's very beautiful. This one's very beautiful. And I advise myself first that if he would speak, the person who was sitting me would speak, I would listen. He would see it as his responsibility that if someone is speaking to him, he listens. Radiallahu ta'ala an. Such a beautiful characteristic, such a beautiful heart. How many times do we go by? Someone is speaking to us and our minds are somewhere else. Someone is speaking to us and inside we're saying, oh my God, I can't wait till this person stops talking. Why did this person have to come and talk to me? I have better things to do. I can't, how can I get out of the situation? No, Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala an wasn't like that. If someone spoke to him, he gave him his 100% attention. Good companionship. A beautiful heart. Subhanallah. Also among good companionship is, as the Prophet ﷺ, as it was observed to be, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that, and I'm paraphrasing here, this isn't the exact hadith, but I'm paraphrasing here, that the Prophet ﷺ was never rough to anyone. And she specifies his wives. He was never tough with his wives. He never hit them, nor was he ever tough with anyone else. You see, we have in the Western world, there's this concept of masculinity. I'm a man, I gotta be a man. And being a man means I'm gonna put my foot down and I'm gonna be tough and rough. And if I say something, I never change my mind. And if I'm convinced with something, I'm going to do it irrespective of what my wife thinks, what my children think, what my parents think. Why? Because that's what it means to be a man. Well, the Prophet ﷺ is giving us another definition of what it means to be a man. He was never rough with anyone. He never complained. The Prophet ﷺ was described as never criticizing or speaking badly of food, even if he didn't like it. If he didn't like food, he would just kind of leave it aside. He would never make a comment. He would never say, oh, this is so salty. Oh, this is dry. Oh, you didn't cook it well this time. Never did that. Alayhi salatu wassalam. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam was never tough. Also, he teaches us, alayhi salatu wassalam, that ما كان الرفق في شيء إلا زانه. Rifq, softness, kindness isn't in something, isn't used to deal with something, except that it beautifies it. A wife who is a husband who is kind to his wife, who is good to his wife, respectable to his wife, then I can guarantee you 99% of the time, that lady, that wife, is going to do the same to her husband. She's going to be kind to him. She's going to be good to him. She's going to honor him. And what I see all too often, when men come to me and they say my wife this and my wife that, or women come to me, it's almost always, I'm sorry man, I'm going to put you under the bus here. It's almost always because the man is not very kind with his wife. Not kind with his words. Not kind with his time. Not kind with his characteristics, what he has. And the woman has to endure that. And slowly but surely her heart hardens and hardens towards him. The Prophet ﷺ was not like that. He teaches us kindness makes things beautiful. And he continues and says, وَمَا نُزِعَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ إِلَّا شَانَ. And it is not taken out of something except that it makes that thing ugly. And look at marriages where the spouses, where the husband and the wife aren't kind to one another. It's an ugly marriage. Ugly. My dear friends, my dear brothers and sisters, especially those who are younger and have yet to be married from the youth. What is it going to hurt you to be kind to your spouse? What does it cost you to say something nice to your spouse? It's free. It doesn't take any energy. But it tends to go back to a heart that's suffering from something. Sometimes it's resentment. Sometimes it's trauma. whatever it might be. But you got to get out of that mode of thought. Sometimes it's toxic masculinity. As much as I don't like that terminology, but type of masculinity that's really not masculine. So the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that. And the Prophet ﷺ, continuing that hadith, or paraphrasing that hadith, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha also teaches us that he was soft, he was never rough, he never spoke ill of food, and he never made rude comments. All too often that word comes out. Oh, get out of my face. Whether to a friend or a child or to a spouse or to a parent, it happens sometimes. We're frustrated. That's not prophetic. That's not part of a beautiful heart. So watch what we say. We need to watch what we say. These are some ways, and this is a long topic, and perhaps another time we can go more and more into detail to look at what the scholars have said, to look at what more of the ahadith. But let's leave it at here, and let's begin at least with our nuclear families, beginning with our spouses and our parents and our children, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who are good in their companionship. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautify our hearts through such behaviors. Ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.